Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And what we do on this show is we read old folklore and fairy tales and then we talk about it live in the chat and so on and so forth. So my framing is weird. If you don't want to watch a man adjust framing, you want to listen to folklore, and you are not watching this live, then I would encourage you to go down to the description where there will be timestamps for when the stories start, of which there are several today. Otherwise, if you are watching live, I can't jump you ahead in time, but if you do want to join in the live chat, there's a little group of potatoes already growing there, and man, are they chatty today. I'm not objecting, but I will say I think I might have missed some things, so I hope people are doing well. I know some people had some surgeries and stuff coming up and some testing. I hope all of that went well. I saw some references to it. I'm sure none of it was flawless, as those experiences are difficult. All right. Just checking my framing again. Anyways, hello, Genera, Uncle Kitty, Jumpstore, GS, Tammy. I think I saw Lizzie Rose in there when I was checking before I went live. Yeah. What are we talking about today? I did notice that there was some curiosity about the title, and that means that the title was well chosen, which is just me congratulating myself, I guess. So, a couple of weeks ago, we were reading through Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which all of our stories come from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which is a collection of translations by Jürgen Hubert. Translations of German folklore collections that most part, I imagine so, are exclusively never been translated to English. He runs a Patreon where you get stories he translates every month. I'm a member. You should be a member. It's a excellent way to get some fun stories every month. I certainly don't read everything he translates, in part because not everything is super relevant for this format, but is still interesting. But also because I think it's good to leave some mystery out there. So you folks, if you like these stories, you should definitely go and support him on his Patreon. Anyhow, a couple of weeks ago from this collection, I was reading some stories on Venetians. But specifically Venetians as conceived of by German countryside. In other words, Venetians are people from another place who came in and were largely, apparently, interested in mining gold and gems from the mountains around Germany. Now, I can't speak knowledgeably as to whether this is based on real events, whether this was a kind of gold rush for Venetians coming to Germany. I can just say it seems very plausible that it's based on real events. But this is folklore, so none of this is accurate. This is not what it was. I just mean the inspiration was there. Now, to that end, when we were doing that session on Venetians last time, it was mostly about Venetians coming in and stealing gold or doing weird things or knowing magic, or one of the big things was that they knew alchemy, so they could make things that were common into uncommon metals and so on. And we are going to see that continued in these stories. But the theme of these stories is more about Venice. And it's an interesting one. And I was trying to think of a way to try to portray to you, my dear audience, where this sort of imagination of Venice was coming from. Now, in many ways, the descriptions of Venice in these stories are not outlandish, but they contain outlandish elements that match up with a different sort of structure in folklore. And to help you understand how a real place that you could go and visit gets this kind of status, I would like you to imagine for a moment, forget about the person specifically, focusing just on sort of their unusual wealth. Imagine for a moment what the inside of a house of Elon Musk or Warren Buffett might contain. See, the thing about those houses is we won't see all their internals. It's locked away from us. But we can imagine, because, they are two men of limitless resources that have likely built a place, well, that you'll never personally visit or see, but that's full of sort of absurd things. But we don't know exactly what those are. There's the probable, I imagine, that comes to mind when you imagine it, like elevators and theaters. But you may also, in the corners of your mind, indulge the improbable, rare gardens of mostly extinct plants and animals, things that probably don't exist there, but your mind goes to it, like, I don't know, a mink-lined solid gold pool of champagne, or secret labs that grow them replacement organs. I mean, who knows, right? Like, in the realm of imagination, if you know that a person has limitless wealth, and you don't really know what that entails because it's an experience you've never had, your brain goes nuts, and there's nothing to really prove otherwise. And in many ways, I think the fascinations with Venice and the Venetians in the German countryside is something of a similar genesis of thought. I think that folklore here that we're going to read is a bit of an end state to that same kind of wonder and imagination that it triggers. If, as the tales described, well-dressed people from an ornate city with rivers for roads show up to mine, bringing with them descriptions of this fantastical city, you can expect that to lead to one's imagination down, lead one's imagination down some wild paths. That's what I'm trying to say. And so in these tales, what we end up seeing from that is a pretty clear transposition of things that we see in Celtic traditions like Tir na Nog, which is this sort of heavenly fae castle city at the bottom of a lake. Or the Norwegian valley at the bottom of the well, which I think we saw either last week or the week before, but is a thing that comes up a lot. Or the change that the strange Feyland part of, or the Icelandic accounts of servants clinging to some Fey queen, which I read last week, and returning to her homeland. It is like that when they talk about Venice in these stories, with the notable change, the interesting twist, that these strange Fey lands that we've talked about before, Tir na Nog and stuff, are known to not be real places anyone has visited. But this is Venice playing that part. So it is a real place, but it's being played. It's not Venice as you would know it. It's not even Venice as it existed at that time. It's a collective German imagination of Venice in that particular area of the countryside. And in that, it's interesting because, well, it shares the name Venice. And while they do acknowledge it's the real Venice, because none of them really ever go there, and these stories are not really about that, it's a fictional land of Venice is what it is. And I think it demonstrates, I mean, it's fascinating to me. Obviously, I have a bit of a fixation on how stories and stuff build and develop, so maybe it isn't to you. But it's fascinating to me because it demonstrates how separated people used to be and how much art served as the only possible bridge they had for that gap. Because they didn't have the money to make that, multi-month journey in some cases. I don't think that's quite the way, how far away Venice was from Germany, but, that could have been the case. And the fact that, like, a lot of your experience of the world was informed by, like, art in a chapel or descriptions from a guy who went there, that was kind of the norm for a long time. And so what we're going to read here is essentially that. A place that in name exists and shares some features with Venice, but in practicality is not really what they're describing, because in all likelihood, this was a tradition started and continued by people who never saw it. Lizzie Rose calls it Venice fanfic. That's a good way to put it. GS says, like the Land of Oz, yes. Lizzie Rose also describes her imagination of rich people's houses. I think it's pretty accurate, but honestly, it's always weirder than that. Like, I remember I was watching a Drew Gooden video, if anyone's familiar with him, where he was talking about Architectural Digest, I think it was, does shows on YouTube where they go to rich people's houses. And this one guy had an entire room of his mansion dedicated to cutting flowers. He was very proud of that concept. Who knows what people waste money and space on. Anyhow, so when I say the fictional land of Venice, that's what I mean. I wanted to set up right away that we're going to be talking about Venice, but do understand that we're not really talking about Venice. We're talking about a folklore conception of a place that was described to these people called Venice. And they have injected it with all the traditions and tropes and cycles that we see in all these other Feyland descriptions, except they're talking about Venetian miners and businessmen from an actual place. And that is, to me, quite entertaining and interesting. Okay, so that's my preamble. A little longer than it's been lately. Hopefully I didn't lose all my viewers. GS says, for those of us who've never been to Venice, it's like the Land of Oz to us, and too many people visit it to this day. And even we have access to video and film of it, so there's going to be a limit on how much fantasy can be injected realistically for us, but they didn't. Like, I was watching the Netflix show Ripley, which is based on the talented Mr. Ripley. It's a more... a less romantic version of this tale, a little more noir. I enjoyed it, but one of the things that really stands out about it is its incredible cinematography of eventually Venice. Spoiler alert, I guess, a bit. So at the very least, I have some sense of what it looks like. All right. Maybe it's just me. Music's a little loud in my ear, so I'm going to turn it down. Pardon me. Our first tale of the night comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, translations by Jürgen Hubert, who runs a Patreon for translating German folklore to English, that I will have pinned in the comment below when the video is no longer live. And this story is called The Miner in Venice. A long time ago, a poor miner lived in Lautenthal. This miner was rich in children, of whom he had eight children. That's nuts. But conversely, much poorer in money and possessions. I have a theory, Mr. Poor Miner, as to why that might be. He toiled mightily for his daily bread. No work was below him. He was diligent, and hard-working, and he rested neither day nor night in order to earn some coin, but he rejected wickedness, for even if he and his wife and children might face hunger, he was unwilling to do wrongs. In the spring, he once fetched reed from a forest pond. After he gathered 2 large bundles, he grew tired and laid down. As it happened, it was a rather hot day, and it was very relaxing to slumber in the shadow of the tall trees. He didn't know how long he'd slept, but he was roused when someone woke him up. He beheld a man standing before him who was quite friendly and asked him how he was doing. The miner first didn't want to speak up, as he was still half asleep, but the stranger became increasingly amicable, and the miner became more animated, started to speak. He said, "I have a lot of trouble as I've to earn bread for 8 children. Furthermore, these are bad times, for in the spring, earning even a little money, and thus you can imagine how I am doing at the moment." The stranger said, "If you are willing to trust me, I can help you, and all your troubles will be gone at once." "If God provides this," the miner said, "I shall thank you on my knees. I would gladly do everything to escape my suffering, as long as you don't demand anything dishonest of me." "No," said the stranger, "this is not something I ask of you. Do you trust me unconditionally?" "Yes, with all my heart, if you mean well." "Naturally. Just lie down again and sleep, and then you shall see what will happen." And the miner was still deeply tired, and he also thought to himself, "It's difficult to sin while asleep," and thus drifted off. He didn't know how long he slept this time, but when he woke up, he was lying in a bed covered with velvet and silk. Most beautiful objects were next to the walls. Dressers, tables, chairs, couches made of pure gold and covered with velvet. Well, then it's not pure gold. Sorry, splitting hairs. The most beautiful mirrors with gold frames hung on the walls, as well as large, man-sized portraits that looked as if they were alive. 2 servants were standing next to the door in clothes that were shining with gold and silver embroidery, and who had waited until the miner woke up. As the miner now had opened his eyes and wondered about these splendors and everything else they beheld, the servants stepped to the bed and inquired whether he had slept well. "Oh, yes," the miner replied, "but good sirs, where am I?" "In Venice," one of the servants replied rather reverentially. "In Venice? Good heavens! How did I get here?" "The good sir will learn this in due time," the other servant said. "May we assist with getting up?" "Oh," replied the miner, "I'm not used to that. I can get up on my own." He climbed out of bed and wanted to put on his belongings, however those were gone. And the servants dressed him in different clothes, which were much more beautiful. Furthermore, they groomed him until he looked like a noble lord. He also had to wash himself out of a silver basin. A servant gave him mouthwash out of a crystal flagon, both of the best and finest type. By the way, I didn't know mouthwash was a thing in this era. The miner was continually amazed and shook his head, not knowing if everything was real or if he was only dreaming. After that, the servants asked how they could be of service. "Oh," said the miner. "Well, I'm hungry and would like something to eat." Immediately the servants went away, and it did not take long for them to bring him a breakfast fit for a king. They put dishes before him until the table itself groaned. Well, the miner thought, if you eat and drink and become sated, then this is probably not a dream after all. He sat down and ate and drank until he was no longer able to continue, for it all tasted better than anything he'd ever eaten before, which probably isn't a hard accomplishment for the era. There was roast, beautiful white bread. And if you are new to folklore, you should know white bread was rare. And strong, fiery, tasty wine. Now he became bolder and asked the servants where their master was and who he might be. The servants were about to answer when the lord of the house came in through the door. It was the same friendly and courteous man whom the miner had seen and talked to near Launtal. The one who had told him to return to sleep, and then everything would be different. And oh boy, he kept his word, didn't he? The man approached him, shook his hand, and asked, "Well, how do you like it here?" "Oh," said the miner. "Well, who wouldn't like it here? But my poor children and my dear wife, I have one request, however. Please tell me, how did I get here, and what do you intend for me?" "I will make you fortunate," said the Lord, "if you trust me. But I will now prove to you that I've known you for a long time, and that I know of your past and future. Step before this mirror. There you shall see what your fate has been." And when the miner stood in front of it, he saw how he had asked his wife to marry him when she was a girl. And then he beheld how he led her into the church as his bride and had his wedding with her, and many other things which he'd long forgotten. But how he remembered and reminisced about those events. He was so amazed that he was unable to speak. And then the Lord led him to the second mirror. And now he saw how his wife and children wept and wailed and lamented for him, for they believed him to be dead. This touched the father, and tears ran over his cheeks. Finally, he had to step in front of a third mirror, and here he saw how he lived in great wealth with his family. But also, he fell back into poverty due to his greed. "Behold," said the Venetian, "this last part will not happen if you follow my lead." "Oh, I will do everything you tell me," said the miner. "Just tell me what I should do." "If you want to stay here for some time, then you are free to do so. But if you want to go home, then this can occur as well," said the Lord. "Oh, yes," answered the miner. "I want to come to the aid of my kin, for I cannot stomach watching the misery in which they have found themselves. Just tell me, dear benefactor, how can I help?" And then he received the reply. "When you arrive at your home, dig a hole beneath the tree in your garden. Do so at night, between 11 and 12 o'clock. Then you shall find yellow earth within it. Form 2 balls from the earth each time you dig there. And these balls should be of a size that can fit within both your hands. Then transport them to Goslar and sell them to the goldsmith. But you must not form balls and sell them more than twice each week. If you create and sell more, it shall be your misfortune. Look, I shall make something for you that will immediately help you recover from your problems. Here I have a certain type of earth, and there I have several liquids. If I pour something from these liquids on this earth, a mere few drops, and form small balls from it with my hand, the most beautiful gemstones take shape." He demonstrated this and gave the gemstones created in this manner, which shone like the sun, to the miner as a keepsake, and said, "When you get to Goslar, you will get heavy coins for this." And the miner thanked him profusely, with tears in his eyes, wrapped them carefully, and put them into his pocket. By the way, in case you're confused, what they're describing there is just sort of the popular conception of a form of alchemy. It's not as it was originally described, because it turned into gemstones, and I don't know of any actual attempts at alchemy that were trying to do that. It's usually just trying to turn things into gold. But basically, this aligns with the Venetians as magical alchemists, and that's where their intense wealth came from. They're possessors of secrets. "Well," said the Venetian, "come and walk with me for a while. You ought to see what it's like here in Venice." They only returned back home late in the evening, and the miner could scarcely remember the sheer amount of beautiful and marvelous things he had seen. The Lord wished him a good night. The servants once again assisted the miner with undressing. He had to lie down in the beautiful bed again, immediately fell asleep due to his great exhaustion. And when he woke up the next morning, well, he was lying beneath the fir tree once more. First he believed that he dreamed everything, but he immediately reached into his pocket, and there he found the 2 gemstones the Venetian had made for him and gifted to him. Then he went to on the road to Goslar, sold them, and received heavy coins for them. When he returned home again, his wife and children joyfully raced towards him, hanging themselves on his neck, on his hands and legs, so that he was unable to get a word in. And then they started to question him if he'd brought money with them, for they were all hungry, almost starving. Then he immediately sent forth for meat and bread, and for the first time in long memory, the wife and children could eat until they were satiated. In the evening, the miner went into the garden between 11 and 12 o'clock as instructed, and found everything just like the Venetian had told him. For many years, the miner was obedient and humble and became a thoroughly rich man. But in the end, the devil of greed got into his head. And thus he made balls for the 3rd time in a week and brought them to Goslar. And when he returned with full pockets, he became tired. Whether he wanted to or not, he had to lie down beneath a fir tree and fall asleep. Then the Venetian appeared, woke him up, and spoke. "See! Now you shall become as poor as you used to be. This is the consequence of your greed." And then he vanished. And it occurred like he'd said, and like the miner had seen it in the mirror. In the end, the miner even died of starvation. Uncle Kitty says apparently mouthwash is assumed to have begun in India around 3,000 years ago. You know, it's weird the things that are recent and the things that aren't. It's never what I think. Like, I think I read somewhere that matches came after lighters, which I guess makes a kind of sense. If I'm remembering that correctly. It was something about lighters. But it's not what we'd think, is it? Lizzie Rose says, if I was this guy's wife, I'd be so pissed. Uncle Kitty says, harsh like usual. So you can see how, you know, if I just swapped Venice for some sort of Fey realm, very little would be changed here, right? Like, this is, in most ways, just the Venice playing the part of a kind of Fey realm. Janera says, moral, listen to your Venetian alchemist friend guy. Uncle Kitty said, when folklore has a bad ending, it really has a bad ending. We're going to see a very similar idea here with the Venetians and the Huntsman. A similar idea played out. That story was longer than I realized. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through all of these. We'll see how we do. Because I actually have a hard out today, which is unusual. I have to, for the tabletop RPG nerds, I have to do a session 0 with somebody that has never played the game, any tabletop RPG. So that will be an interesting and fun experience, I think. All right. Also, if you're a true tabletop RPG nerd, it's Shadow Dark, because that's the table I have space on. I don't know what it's going to be like to start with an OSR game. For the rest of the world, the normal people, with absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. Okay. Our next tale is called The Venetians and the Huntsman. And it also comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of translated German folklore from Jürgen Hubert, who you can support on his Patreon, which I will have pinned down below, called Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles. Also, technically, it's 2 stories, but they're about pretty much the same topic. Lizzie Rose says, "How dare you call me normal?" Fair enough. Many years ago, there was a huntsman in Altenau. Who once laid down or slept on a meadow in the Schultal Valley. Then 2 Venetians appeared, who always traveled to the Bruckberg mountain in order to extract the gold that no one else knew how to find. And if I was to summarize this myth cycle, that's the sentence. Or 2, I guess. They woke him up and asked if he could show them the way to Bruckberg. The huntsman was well acquainted with the area and led them there. At the Bruckberg, there was a small pit which led into the mountain like a mining tunnel. Here they dug up yellow earth and filled their bags with it. This earth was pure gold. Once they were done, they all lied down and slept. But when they woke up again, all of them were in Venice. The 2 companions showed the huntsman around the city and showed him their immeasurable treasures of gold, silver, and gemstones, which filled many cupboards. In one such cupboards, they had whole arrangements of quarry animals, stags, deers, wild pigs, and many other animals, and all were made out of either gold or silver. The huntsman received a silver stag as a keepsake. When the huntsman woke up in the next morning, he was once again on the meadow in the Schultal Valley, where he had lain, and the silver stag was next to him. When the huntsman wanted to visit the pit again, he found neither the pit nor the path to it. The same legend is also told in the Upper Harz region in the following manner, though it does have some distinct differences. A district forester went into his district one morning. Then he saw 6 people coming his way from afar. He approached them and asked them what they were doing there, but he knew none of them. As they were so nondescript, they did not have a proper human nature. I'm going to pause here for a moment, because that's a weird sentence to our ears. What is a proper human nature? Now, to some extent, this could just be the basic xenophobia we talked about in the first one. But I think, leading to sort of my opening thesis for this patch of stories, something else is being implied here. I think he means that they'd seem fey. I think that's what's being said here. You can disagree, because I genuinely don't know. But just something about where it comes up and how he brings it up and how he deals with it strikes me as saying he seems to think the Venetians are some sort of fey creature. But he knew none of them, as they were so nondescript and did not have a proper human nature. He threatened them and told them that they should not ruin his district, but then went away without disturbing them further. The next morning, he returned to his spot in order to look for the little men, but he did not encounter anyone. He sat down and fell asleep, and when he woke up, he was in a wholly different region. He stepped forward, and he reached a large body of water, and then a dog approached him, offered to carry him over the water, and when he reached the other side, he found a large garden. In it there were birds who could speak. There was a house that was as transparent as crystal. Then the 6 little men appeared and led him into the house. Here everything was made out of gold, even the animals, stags, hares, foxes, and so forth. The little men prompted the forester to take something, and he chose a 5-pointer stag, again made of solid gold. Then they pressured him to eat. The dishes were white snakes. The forester initially said that this was not something one should eat, but his protests were to no avail. Now he had to lie down in a bed, and when he woke up, he once again sat under the tree in his district and looked around whether he was dreaming or awake. Next to him a spring was gurgling, and one of those entities emerged from it. He told him that he wasn't asleep, and next to him there was the 5-pointed stag he'd wished for, and then the little man vanished again. But the forester went home with his 5-pointer, pleased and bewildered in equal measure. Like, if I drop the word Venetian, that's just the story of the Fae, right? Uncle Kitty says, would you like broiled snake? For sure. This one, more than any, it is interesting because it has such a... You know, Folklore is a game of telephone, as a lot of people say. I think it's less of a game of telephone than people say, but it is ultimately a bit of a game of telephone. To see these two stories, you have this, like, one that you can kind of see where the most fantastical part of it is they sort of teleport to Venice, and it's a bit of a heightened version of Venice, where there's... You know, Venice was always a rich city, but it wasn't that rich, where you just had gems falling out of every cupboard. But then to see the next story where like a dog carries you across the river and there's animals made of gold, but they are still animals, and the building itself is all solid crystal. Like that's Fae stuff. All right. Carrying on. Our next tale is called The Land of the Venetians. Which makes me laugh because it's just Venice. But you'll see why it's defined that way. It comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, as described before. Translated by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support as his Patreon in the pinned comment below. Once there was a Venetian who was hired as a foreman in Clausta. When the miners wanted to go home, he immediately let them go, as he did all their work for him. He was frequently punished due to his leniency, and thus wanted to return to Venice. He dismissed all his workers, except for the signal man, and asked him if he wanted to accompany him. The signal man answered, yes. Then they entered the side shaft where the ore barrels are transported into the mine, and the foreman distributed so many explosives that they destroyed the tunnels entirely. His rage was so great that he also blew up a miner who was working there along with the tunnels, even though the signal man pleaded for the miner's life. What a wild turn that paragraph took. And even after seeing that, this signal man still goes with him to Venice. After that, after murdering a worker who had nothing to do with this, who was actively doing work, they had breakfast together, and then they walked along the rocks where there was a well-made path. Once they'd traveled far enough, they reached the land of the Venetians. Ooh. And emerged in a beautiful garden next to the foreman's house. The signal man liked it there very much, but after he'd been there for some time, he asked the foreman if he wanted to visit the Harz region once more. The foreman replied that he'd like to do that, and took his pit lamp. Now they went deeper and deeper into the rock once more. Since everything within the mountains had collapsed, he was no longer able to determine where they had their breakfast, and thus the foreman led him all the way out of the rock. If you're confused, don't worry, it's a confusing story that doesn't really explain its timeline very well. But when the signal man reached Claustai, Nobody knew him there anymore, and his wife and his children weren't there anymore either. Then the bold books were consulted, and it was written there that this miner had vanished several hundred years ago. But he had believed that he had only been a few years in the land of the Venetians, which is almost identical to how the Tir na Nog myth works, by the way. In Tir na Nog, well, not all of them, but a lot of them, this is a Celtic, primarily Irish myth that I have many years ago read, like 2 or 3 years ago, that I love. But you go to the bottom of a lake, and there's some fey princess in a castle at the bottom of the lake, walks you around her castle. You stay there for 3 days. You come back to the surface of the lake because you want to see her family or something like that. And there's a bunch of variations on it, but the gist of it is, it turns out it was 300 years, each day being a century. All right. People talking about Halloween. I'll be honest, I don't know what I'm doing for Halloween this year. Over and above, like, my longer thing that I usually do. I mean, just for the month. I'm running thin on stuff that works for the channel that's Halloween-y. I'll do my best. But we may, at some point, need to give up on the theme. I'm sorry to say. Okay. Same with Christmas stuff, which makes me very sad, but it's hard to find. This is actually our last tale of the night. Our next and last tale of the night is Hans in Venice, which has one of the least satisfying endings of a story I've ever read. So look forward to that. It also comes to us from Sunken Castle Evil Poodles, translations by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support in the pinned comment down below. There once was a time when Venetians and Italians in general traveled through all the mountain regions of Germany in order to, as it was claimed, search for gold sand. For appearance's sake, they traded with heckling combs or mouse traps and returned home once again once they had filled their knapsacks with this so-called gold sand. I don't know what that means. I'm open to people helping me grasp what they mean by appearance sake. I guess so that they don't look too rich. Is that what they're saying? Anyways, chew on that, chat. Such Venetians, as they were usually called, also visited the Fictional mountain range. And many memorable events took place between them and the inhabitants of the mountains. Among others, one such Venetian named Gabriel stayed with a farmer for a long time who lived in the village of Fireside at the old country road to Eiger. He lived there as if he was a resident and was treated like a member of the family. During the day, he wandered through the mountains, and when he got back home, he slept behind the oven, was lying on the furs of wild pigs and bears and wolves, for such beasts were still common. Whoop, get my camera there. In the Fichtelgebirge in those days. In this manner, Gabriel lived in harmony and friendship with the farmer. Neither disturbed the other in his business. The farmer did not ask where the stranger was wandering around during the day, what he was looking for, and whether he wanted to return home again. The latter paid his bill every week without indicating that he would soon go away, or indeed at all. Both were used to each other and liked living together. As, after a long succession of years, the farmer didn't even consider that his friend might ever leave him again, it was all the more expected when Gabriel simply told him one day He would leave tomorrow, go back to Venice, and never return to this region. Everyone in the house was saddened over this news, and the wife and children wept as if their own father was leaving. But Gabriel left anyways. During the goodbyes, he cordially shook the hand of his host and said, "Farewell, Hans, and let me tell you one more thing while we part. A sad fate awaits you. You will eventually suffer dire straits, and during these hard times you will need money and friends if you want to be saved. Then think of me, your friend Gabriel, and come to Venice. Goodbye." And then Gabriel set forth to Venice. The farmer mutely stared after him as long as he was able, and then he quietly returned into his house and contemplated these dark words. "What fine words for our separation," he said. 10 years have I cared for him, provided for him, and as thanks he gives me the news that I will suffer dire straits. And this prophecy, doesn't it take away my entire peace of mind? Couldn't he simply have said, 'You will suffer misfortune'?" But his wife, a smart woman, encouraged him to put those words out of his mind and no longer think of them. This was difficult for the good Hans, and only time could weaken the memory somewhat. 1 year passed, and then another, and as still no deprivation had occurred, the belief in the prophecy waned, and no one in the house gave it any further thoughts. One Sunday, 4 years later, Hans was in the pub, as usual. And I'm curious, chat, because it's going to take me a minute to read this out. What do you think causes his misfortune? I'm curious what your guesses are, because it's not what I would have guessed. He had feasted well, and was more than a little tipsy. And then suddenly, a loud quarrel arose between young men. First there was an exchange of harsh words, and then they tore at each other's hairs, and finally they pummeled each other. Like others, Hans stepped outside in order to restore peace, and used a ripped-out chair leg for this purpose. But he'd been drinking. He swung around with no sense of restraint. The brandy kept him from seeing where he swung the chair leg, and oh dear, he then killed a young farmer dead as a doornail, with just an unlucky hit. Is it just an unlucky hit? He was drunk and swinging around basically a baseball bat. Suddenly, the unfortunate Hans became altogether sober, and immediately he jumped up to escape just punishment. While the relatives of the slain man pursued him, the darkness of night and the dense forest hid him. He ran and ran for 6 hours, and then became exhausted, had to sit down, and fell asleep. He woke up late in the next morning, and only then did this despair of his situation sink in. "What shall I do? Where shall I go?" he cried. And suddenly he remembered Gabriel's words. "Yes, Gabriel, I shall come to you." After saying this, he jumped up and stepped forward, as if refreshed by his determination. "But where does Venice lie? To the right? To the left? Forwards or backwards?" Who could answer this question? And thus, I can't imagine this as a real strategy. He went straight ahead and hoped for the best. Many of those he asked for the quickest route to Venice laughed at him, and many rebuked him, and thus he only arrived in the beautiful city after 10 full weeks. As soon as he had taken a few steps on its streets, he asked the first man he encountered where Gabriel lived, but the man ignored him and gave him no answer. He walked onwards, looking everywhere for Gabriel, but Gabriel was nowhere to be found. He asked 10 more times for Gabriel's abode, but they laughed at him, or at best answered by shaking their heads. In this manner the first day passed, the second, and also the third day. Hans ran himself to exhaustion by passing through all the streets, questioned and questioned, but Gabrielle was nowhere to be found. "Oh, how unfortunate I am," he cried out. "I have finally arrived in the city of my old friend Gabrielle, and I cannot find him. I can't go home. I have no money left either. So what shall become of me?" Full of despair, he sat down on a wall next to a canal, and bright tears ran over his cheeks. "If I don't find him today, I shall throw myself into the ocean." And then it seemed as if someone was calling his name. He looked around, listening to make sure his ears had not deceived him, and then a voice shouted louder still, "Hans! Hans of the Fictional Mountains!" Hans jumped up, looked around, but saw no one who might have called him. Reflexively, he walked a few steps ahead and did not know where he should turn. Then the voice called again. I'm laughing because if somebody had submitted this to my writing group, I'd be like drawing a line through it and be like, okay, guys, we get it. Why are we spending so much on this in the story? Hans of Wolfersreit, are you looking for your friend Gabrielle? Here I am, up here. Hans now looked up into the air, and behold, Gabrielle waved at him from the window of a beautiful, large palace. He scarcely believed his eyes. It was Gabrielle's voice, Gabrielle's face, but how distinguished, how splendidly dressed he was. And I'm gonna say right now, what do you think the ending of this is? What a magnificent place he lived in. Uncertain of what he should do, he remained standing there in shock and bewilderment. Then the door of the palace opened up, and Gabrielle, the owner of the same, stepped outside in luxurious clothing. Hey, Hans, do you not no longer recognize your old house guest, Gabrielle? Hans looked at him from head to the toes and remained standing there as if petrified. Gabrielle then took him by the hand, pulled him into the house, and led him into a grand room. Do you still not recognize me, Hans? He said. I am Gabrielle, who lived with you for 10 years in Wolfersreit. Hans shook his head and was unable to utter a word, and then Gabrielle exited the room and left the stunned farmer standing there alone. What is happening here, thought Hans, looking around the room in amazement without moving one step. And then the door opened again after a while, and Gabrielle stepped in, dressed with the same dirty garments he'd worn back then. Oh, Gabrielle, it is you, cried out Hans, and the friends hugged each other. Now Hans acted like he usually did with Gabrielle. He talked on a first-name basis, as he used to, and told him of his fate, his misfortune, and his long and difficult journey to Venice. And in this manner the day went past under friendly discussions until it was time to sleep. Then the rich Gabrielle asked, Well, my old Hans, whom do you want to sleep with tonight? You have the choice of a bear, a wolf, a wild pig. The man from the Fictional Mountains didn't know what this question was supposed to mean. He suspected nothing less than the punishment of his liberties in this grand mansion. As he remained silent, Gabrielle took him by the hand and led him through a lot of chambers, of which each was more splendidly adorned than the next. Then they walked through a long gallery to the most remote part of the house, where they finally stepped into a bedroom. And what did he behold here? There were 3 golden beds standing there, one of which was exquisitely built to appear like a bear, the other one as a wolf, and the third one like a wild pig. Behold, Hans, Gabrielle explained. These beds and all the valuables you find in my grand palace are the fruits of my stay with you in the Fictional Mountains. There I gather gold sand, which your people do not know and thus do not value, and I used it to turn myself into a rich man. There I slept on furs of bears and wolves and wild pigs in your house, and now you choose in which bed you want to sleep. Good night. Gabrielle left the astonished hands. The latter picked the bear-shaped bed and slept deeply and comfortably until the next morning. There you go. All the plot points resolved. What questions could a person have left after that ending? What happened to his family and all the problems? I guess he just abandoned them, but at least he got to sleep in a golden bear bed? What a weird story. Janera says I was kind of right. Lol, roommates. Are they roommates? Or did he literally just stay here a night? Like, is this the story of him living with him? Or is this the story of, like, a guy who runs away, goes to his friend, and his friend's like, well, I don't have any gold. Your family can't come here, and you can't stay here. But tonight, bear bed. Uncle Kitty says, that sounds like a lot of low-budget films I've watched. Yeah, where they just basically have to give up on a bunch of plot points because they ran out of money. You know, it's funny because, and I hate to bring this up on the internet because it draws a bunch of ire that I'm not trying to draw, but the biggest budget version of that I've ever seen, where like a plot point is introduced and developed and then just dropped, was Revenge of the Sith. There's, I mean, more than one, but there's at least one. I won't get into it here because I'm inviting a conversation I don't want to have. But that's the one that comes to mind, where it's just like, I'm obviously that's not a budget problem, but I guess at some point the editors just go, let's just get this thing out of our hands. Tammy says, I hope everyone had a wonderful night. Thank you for the interesting stories. Sweet dreams all. Sweet dreams to you, Tammy. I hope you're doing better. Jumpstore says, I like wolves, but pigs are also very intelligent. I still think wolf. Uncle Kitty, well, we ran out of money. Trying to find a way to wrap this sucker up. Yeah. Wild pigs are ferocious. Well, ferocity is not mitigated by intelligence, is it? I think the human species testifies to that. Yeah, I don't know what that story was. It fits our theme, which is a discussion of how like a real place becomes embroiled in the tropes of fae places, you know. And it's it is interesting because for a while I was like, this seems very weird. And then when I put myself in this sort of headspace of somebody who lives on the slopes of some distant German mountain, and a guy comes along in fancy Italian clothing, a prospector of some sort, and he's talking about, the streets, they're made of gold, and the buildings, you'll never see sculpting like this in your life. Like it captures the imagination, and then we run wild with it. Anyways. Like I said, I got a place to be, so thank you everyone for keeping me company. Hope you enjoyed the tales. Again, if you want to support Jürgen Hubert, you should. I will have it in a pinned comment below when the video is no longer live. Janera says, good night, everyone. Have fun playing Shadow Dark. Thank you. I do. I'm a perpetual DM. I DM 3 tables at this point. But I actually really quite enjoy DMing. As probably is apparent because, what do I do here? I tell stories. I like telling stories. Hopefully it goes well. As per usual, I'll keep the fire going. You folks have a good sleep.